Don't forget to subscribe. Enjoy your viewing.
I never imagined that the love of my life, Elena, could break my heart so completely. My name is David, and until recently, I believed our bond was unbreakable, a foundation built on trust, laughter, and a shared dream of a future together. Now, as I sit here, alone with my thoughts, I find myself revisiting the days when everything seemed perfect, wondering how we reached this point where suspicion and pain have replaced our love. It all began subtly. Small changes in her behavior that I initially brushed off as stress from work or the simple evolution of a relationship. Elena had always been the more outgoing one, the one who thrived on social interactions and new experiences. I, on the other hand, was quieter, content with the routine and the comfort of our shared home. I trusted her implicitly, believing that her occasional late nights and whispered phone calls were nothing more than harmless coincidences. But as time passed, the subtle signs began to add up. I remember one chilly November evening when I came home early from work, expecting to find Elena curled up on the couch with a book. Instead, I discovered her engaged in a hushed conversation on the phone, her eyes darting nervously towards the door every few seconds. My heart sank as I realized that what I had dismissed as an innocent moment was something far more troubling. I tried to convince myself that I was merely overthinking, a man haunted by the fear of losing the one person who meant everything to him. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. In the weeks that followed, my suspicions grew stronger. I found traces of hidden texts on her phone, a series of unanswered calls and cryptic messages that hinted at a secret life I never knew existed. My mind raced with questions that I dared not ask, for fear of confirmation and the inevitable confrontation. The weight of uncertainty began to crush me, each unanswered question a heavy stone in the reservoir of my heart. I wrestled with the reality that perhaps my intuition was correct, that Elena was no longer the woman I thought I knew. The turning point came on a rainy Saturday morning. I had planned to surprise her with breakfast in bed, a small, yet intimate gesture meant to rekindle the spark that I felt was fading. As I tiptoed through our quiet apartment, I heard the sound of hushed voices coming from our bedroom. My pulse quickened as I peered through the slightly ajar door, my heart pounding like a war drum. There, in the dim light, I saw her, the woman I loved, wrapped in the arms of another man. The scene was surreal, as if I had stepped into a nightmare from which there was no waking. In that moment, every memory of our shared dreams, our whispered promises, crumbled into dust. The shock and betrayal were overwhelming. I stood frozen, paralyzed by the gravity of the revelation. How could the person who had vowed to be my partner, my confidant, betray me in such a heartless manner? In that frozen moment, I felt a fierce storm of emotions, anger, sorrow, disbelief, and an aching loneliness that seemed to consume every part of me. I felt like a mere spectator in a tragic play where I had been cast as both the lover and the betrayed. The silence that followed the confrontation was deafening, a silence that spoke louder than any words could. In the days that followed, I grappled with the painful aftermath. I found myself wandering through memories of our happier times, searching for clues that might have warned me of this betrayal. I recalled the laughter we shared on summer nights, the gentle touch of her hand, and the dreams we had nurtured together. Each memory now felt tainted, overshadowed by the cruel reality of her infidelity. I questioned whether the love we had built was ever genuine or if it had been a beautiful illusion, destined to shatter under the weight of betrayal. I spent long nights staring at the ceiling, wrestling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was an intense desire to confront her, to demand answers and seek a semblance of closure. On the other, there was a paralyzing fear that any confrontation would only deepen the chasm between us, leaving us both irrevocably scarred. The man I once was, a man of quiet strength and unwavering resolve, seemed to be evaporating, replaced by someone overwhelmed by self-doubt and regret. I questioned every decision I had ever made, wondering if I could have done something differently to prevent this betrayal. As the days turned into weeks, I attempted to piece together my shattered identity. I sought solace in solitude, turning to old journals and memories of a time when our love was pure and unblemished. Each page I read was a painful reminder of what I had lost. I began to write again, trying to capture the emotions that swirled within me: anger, heartbreak, and a profound sense of loss. Writing became both an act of catharsis and a way to preserve the remnants of a love that once felt so invincible. Throughout this internal battle, I remained haunted by the question: how could I have missed the signs? Was it that I was too blinded by love, or was it simply that betrayal can be so cunningly concealed behind a mask of normalcy? The truth, I eventually realized, was that love is a complex tapestry of trust and vulnerability, and when one thread is pulled loose, the entire fabric begins to unravel. I was left holding the frayed edges of our shared existence, trying desperately to mend what was broken even as the wounds festered. Despite the overwhelming pain, there was also an undercurrent of resolve that began to emerge from within me. I understood that healing would not come overnight and that the path ahead was fraught with emotional turmoil. Yet, even in the midst of betrayal, I clung to a small hope that this heartbreak could one day lead to growth and self-discovery. The man I was, defined by unwavering trust and an open heart, now had a choice to make: to let the pain consume me, or to rise above it and rebuild my life from the ruins of our shattered love. In the final moments of that day, the day I discovered the betrayal, I sat by the window, watching as the rain washed away the remnants of a love that had once promised eternal happiness. The storm outside mirrored the tempest within me, a turbulent mix of sorrow and anger. I resolved then that nothing would ever be the same, that the foundation of trust had been irreparably cracked. And while I yearned for the possibility of forgiveness or reconciliation, I also knew that some breaches of trust leave scars too deep to heal. As I write these words now, I do so with a heavy heart, burdened by the weight of memories and the knowledge that our journey together has reached a crossroads. I am determined to move forward, to learn from the pain and emerge stronger, even as the ghost of betrayal continues to haunt my every step. My story is only beginning, and while I remain uncertain of what the future holds, one thing is clear: the love that once bound us has been replaced by an inescapable sense of loss and disillusionment. This chapter of my life closes not with a whisper, but with the echo of betrayal, a chapter marked by shattered illusions and the painful realization that sometimes love can be the cruelest of all fates. I know that the road ahead will be long and filled with challenges, but I am resolved to face each day with the hope that, through the darkness, I might find a glimmer of light. In the days following that fateful morning, my world felt like a series of disjointed moments, each one marked by the heavy burden of betrayal. The discovery of Elena's infidelity had torn through the fabric of my existence, leaving behind jagged edges that refused to be smoothed over by time or reason. I found myself trapped in a limbo of emotions, where every sunrise was a reminder of a trust irreparably lost and every sunset, a melancholic farewell to the life I once knew. I spent the early hours of each day in solitude, wrestling with the shock and the anger that surged within me. Mornings were the hardest, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The silence of our apartment was deafening. It was as if the walls themselves mourned the collapse of our love. I tried to recall when everything had gone wrong, if there was a singular moment or a gradual descent into deception, but the truth was elusive, hidden among the scattered fragments of our shared past. One particularly overcast afternoon, I decided that I could no longer bear the isolation of my thoughts. With trembling resolve, I reached out to Elena. I needed answers, a glimpse of clarity amid the fog of uncertainty. When she agreed to meet at a small, inconspicuous cafe in the heart of the city, my heart pounded with a mixture of hope and dread. The cafe, usually a place of solace with its soft background music and gentle chatter, now felt like the setting for an unavoidable reckoning. As I sat across from her, I couldn't help but notice the changes in her demeanor. Elena appeared smaller somehow, her eyes downcast and her fingers nervously fidgeting with the rim of her coffee cup. The air between us was thick with unspoken words and the gravity of what we were about to confront. I struggled to find the right words, feeling as though every attempt to speak would either shatter what little remained of our past or further ignite the embers of my anger. "Elena, I need to understand," I began, my voice a mix of tremor and determination. "How did we get here? What happened to us?" My words hung in the air like fragile glass, each syllable weighted with the hope of finding a sliver of the truth that might somehow make sense of the chaos I felt inside. Her silence was deafening, and for a moment, I feared that my question might have been too harsh. Finally, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "David, I never meant to hurt you." Those simple words carried the weight of remorse and regret, yet they did nothing to mend the growing chasm between us. The delicate balance of our relationship, once built on mutual affection and trust, was now marred by a betrayal that could not be undone. I pressed on, desperate for a narrative that might explain the inexplicable. "But why, Elena? Why did you do it?" My voice cracked as I struggled to maintain composure. I saw a flicker of pain cross her face, quickly masked by a hardened resolve. "I was lost, David," she replied quietly. I felt suffocated, like I was drowning in expectations and obligations. I thought that, maybe I needed something else. Something different. Her words, though whispered, reverberated within me. It wasn't just the act of betrayal, it was the realization that our connection had become a prison for her, one that I had unknowingly contributed to. Her admission only deepened my inner turmoil. The idea that my love might have been a source of confinement was a bitter pill to swallow. I recalled the moments when I had taken pride in being the steadfast anchor in our relationship, never imagining that my reliability could be interpreted as a lack of passion or freedom. Instead, it was now portrayed as a trap from which she needed escape. I felt anger, raw and unfiltered, at the thought that my steadfast nature, something I had once believed was my greatest strength, had inadvertently become the very reason for her wandering heart. For hours, we sat in that café, locked in a dialogue that oscillated between painful reminiscence and accusatory silence. I tried to piece together a narrative, reaching for memories of the laughter and lightness we once shared, while Elena's words dissolved those memories into shadows of what might have been. Every sentence seemed to underscore the finality of our predicament. As the conversation wore on, it became painfully clear that we were speaking not as partners in love but as two strangers whose paths had diverged irreversibly. The finality of that meeting was etched in every hesitant word and every avoided glance. As we parted ways outside the café, the air between us was charged with a palpable sense of foreboding. I walked away with a heavy heart, knowing that nothing spoken that day could mend the chasm between us. The streets were unusually empty, mirroring the emptiness I felt inside, a stark contrast to the bustling life we had once planned to share. Each step I took was a reluctant farewell to a future that would never be, a future filled with shared dreams and whispered promises. In the following days, I began the arduous process of confronting the aftermath. I sought refuge in memories, both painful and tender, as I attempted to understand how love could twist so disastrously into something unrecognizable. I poured my emotions into journals and late-night letters that I never sent, each word a raw testimony to a heart under siege. In these solitary moments, the pain was accompanied by an unsettling clarity. Sometimes, love is not enough to hold two people together when the foundation has been eroded by betrayal and unmet expectations. I began to reach out to old friends, seeking the counsel of those who had known me before Elena entered my life. Their advice was a blend of compassion and pragmatic caution. They urged me to focus on healing, to accept that some scars may never fully fade, and to learn from the loss that now defined this chapter of my existence. I attended a support group for people who had experienced similar betrayals, where each story echoed my own in ways that both comforted and disoriented me. The shared narratives of heartbreak revealed a universal truth: while the pain of betrayal is profoundly personal, the journey toward healing is one we are all compelled to embark upon, alone yet interconnected by our suffering. I began to reflect on the role that our communication, or the lack thereof, had played in the slow disintegration of our relationship. I recognized that both Elena and I had silently allowed our grievances to fester, each of us too proud or too afraid to speak the painful truths that lay hidden beneath the surface. Our inability to express our needs and vulnerabilities had set the stage for misunderstandings, leaving us adrift in a sea of unspoken expectations. The confrontation at the cafe was merely the tipping point, a sudden release of all the pent-up frustrations that had been quietly eroding the bond we once cherished. Despite the overwhelming sorrow, I also felt an unexpected surge of determination. The betrayal, as devastating as it was, had forced me to reevaluate not only my relationship with Elena but also my own self-worth. I resolved that this would be a turning point, not to dwell in despair, but to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried under the weight of a love that had turned toxic. I began to explore new hobbies, reconnect with interests I had long neglected, and even considered professional help to navigate the labyrinth of my emotions. Yet, even as I took these tentative steps toward self-reclamation, the thought of Elena lingered like a specter in my mind. Her face, filled with remorse one moment and defiance the next, haunted my dreams and my waking hours. I wondered if she too was grappling with her own inner demons, if the freedom she had sought was nothing more than an illusion that came with its own heavy price. In a twisted way, I wished that I could understand the full scope of her pain, even as I acknowledged that our paths were now irreversibly separate. As the chapter of our shared life began to close, the future loomed uncertain and solitary. The realization settled in that the love we once nurtured had become a battleground for conflicting desires and shattered ideals. The finality of our encounter at the cafe, the painful admissions, and the silent farewells had marked the beginning of an inevitable parting. It was a parting that, despite its sorrow, held a promise of liberation, a chance for both of us to confront our own truths and rebuild our lives from the remnants of what had once been. Now, as I sit alone in my dimly lit study, I feel the weight of our history pressing upon me. The echoes of our laughter, the whispered dreams, and even the silent despair now form a bittersweet symphony that underscores the inescapable reality: love, when tainted by betrayal, can only lead to a hostile separation. And so, with a heavy heart yet a resolute spirit, I prepare to step forward into a future defined not by the shadows of the past, but by the painful, yet liberating, process of moving on. The days following my initial confrontation with Elena turned into a blur of half-remembered moments and relentless inner turmoil. I attempted to fill the void left by our crumbling relationship with busy routines and new distractions, yet nothing could erase the image of her defiant eyes and the memory of our last conversation. As the days turned to weeks, the fragile remnants of our shared past continued to haunt me, each memory a bittersweet reminder of what once was and what could never be again. I began to immerse myself in work, throwing myself into projects with a fervor that bordered on desperation. The hours at the office provided a temporary reprieve from the constant echo of betrayal, yet even in the midst of deadlines and meetings, I couldn't escape the gnawing sense that my life had fundamentally shifted. In every quiet corner of the office, in every pause between tasks, my mind wandered back to Elena. I questioned every shared smile, every gentle touch, trying to decipher where the cracks had started to widen. Outside of work, my social circle became a patchwork of well-meaning friends and sympathetic colleagues. Late-night conversations at dimly lit diners and hushed chats in quiet bars were filled with advice and consoling words, but they also served as painful reminders of the void that had formed between us. I listened to stories of similar betrayals, each narrative reinforcing the idea that love, as intense as it may be, sometimes harbors secrets that can unravel even the strongest bonds. Amidst this turmoil, I decided to seek professional help, a counselor who specialized in relationship trauma and betrayal. In the soft, quiet ambience of her office, I began to confront the raw, painful emotions that had been left unspoken for too long. Dr. Harris, with her calm demeanor and gentle probing questions, helped me navigate the labyrinth of guilt, anger, and sorrow that had overtaken my thoughts. She asked me to reflect on the moments of denial, to see how my own vulnerabilities might have contributed to our inevitable breakdown. The process was neither quick nor easy, it forced me to acknowledge the parts of myself I had long kept hidden. I slowly began to understand that while Elena's betrayal was a devastating blow, it was also a mirror reflecting my own shortcomings and the silent disintegration of our shared communication. In tandem with therapy, I sought solace in creative pursuits. I took up painting, a hobby I had abandoned years ago, and found that the act of putting brush to canvas allowed me to externalize the chaos inside. Each stroke was a struggle against the overwhelming urge to succumb to despair, yet with every color mixed, I began to see hints of clarity emerging from the chaos. The canvases, initially filled with tumultuous splashes of red and black, gradually gave way to a more nuanced spectrum of hues. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the pain but about understanding it, transforming it into something that could serve as a testament to my resilience. Despite these steps toward personal recovery, the unresolved presence of Elena continued to loom over me. One chilly evening, as autumn began to give way to winter, I received an unexpected message from her. It was brief, a simple note asking if we could meet one last time to talk. The invitation stirred a maelstrom of conflicting emotions within me. Part of me longed for closure, for an opportunity to express the depths of my hurt and anger, while another part feared that opening the old wounds would only hinder my progress toward healing. After much contemplation, I agreed to meet her at an old park bench by the lake, a place that had once symbolized our shared dreams and whispered promises. The park, with its skeletal trees and icy breeze, now seemed to echo the somber reality of our lives. I arrived early, the cold seeping into my bones as I sat on the familiar bench, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Every moment of waiting was a reminder of the fragility of time, of the way our lives could change with a single decision. When Elena finally appeared, her figure seemed diminished against the stark winter landscape. She wore a long coat that hid much of her face, and as she approached, I could see the traces of regret mingling with defiance in her eyes. There was no warmth in her greeting, only the tired politeness of two strangers forced to confront a shared past. We exchanged few words of small talk, both of us acutely aware that this meeting was not meant for reconciliation but for a final reckoning. "Elena," I began, my voice unsteady, "I needed to see you one last time. I have to understand, what now? Where do we go from here?" I struggled to keep my tone neutral, though the hurt and anger were still raw beneath the surface. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, her eyes reflecting a tumult of emotions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke softly, "David, I don't think there's anything left to salvage. We've tried, we've talked, but every conversation just deepens the wounds." Her admission, though delivered in a hushed tone, resonated with a finality that I hadn't dared to face until that moment. The conversation that unfolded was a delicate dance of memories and regrets. We recounted the moments of joy that once defined us, each recollection now tinged with the bitterness of betrayal. Elena admitted that she had long felt trapped, not just in our relationship but in the expectations that weighed her down. She confessed that her actions, however misguided, were an attempt to reclaim a freedom that she felt was slowly slipping away. I listened in silence, each word cutting deeper than the last, as I grappled with the realization that the love we once shared had been suffocated by unspoken resentments and unmet desires. As the dialogue progressed, it became increasingly clear that our paths had diverged irrevocably. What once was a mutual effort to nurture a future together had now devolved into an acknowledgement of our individual needs and the recognition that they were no longer compatible. The finality of our separation was not marked by dramatic accusations or bitter confrontations, but by a quiet, mutual understanding, a resigned acceptance that some bonds, once broken, could never be repaired. Standing up from that bench, we shared a final, lingering look, a silent farewell to a shared past that had brought both joy and pain. I felt a heavy sadness in that moment, a poignant mix of grief and relief. Grief for the love that was lost, and relief for the promise of freedom from a relationship that had become a battlefield of emotions. As we walked away in opposite directions, the cold wind seemed to carry away the last remnants of our shared dreams, leaving behind only the stark reality of fractured lives. That evening, I returned to my empty apartment with a renewed determination to rebuild my life. The finality of our conversation had opened a door to self-discovery, a path I had been hesitant to tread for fear of facing the truth about myself. With each step I took toward healing, I carried the scars of our shared past, not as a burden, but as a reminder that growth often comes from the most painful of experiences. The betrayal, in all its raw cruelty, had forced me to confront my vulnerabilities and to redefine what it meant to be whole. In the weeks that followed, I embraced the solitude, finding solace in the quiet moments that allowed me to reconnect with my inner self. I continued my sessions with Dr. Harris, each session peeling back layers of sorrow and revealing small fragments of hope. I immersed myself in art and writing, channeling my emotions into creative expressions that spoke of loss, resilience, and ultimately, the will to move forward. Yet, despite these steps toward healing, there remained an undeniable tension in the air, a constant reminder that the love we once had morphed into a bitter farewell. Our final meeting was not a prelude to reconciliation but rather the prologue to a life defined by separation. The hostility of our parting, subtle yet undeniable, had set the stage for the final act of our shared story, a final act where our paths would permanently diverge, leaving behind nothing but echoes of what once was. As I write these words now, I am painfully aware that the journey toward healing is long and fraught with unexpected turns. The wound of betrayal may never fully close, but with time, I hope that the scars will fade into quiet reminders of a chapter that once defined me. The finality of that cold winter day, with its muted colors and heavy silences, has irrevocably altered my course. I stand at the threshold of a new beginning, aware that the road ahead will be challenging, but resolute in my commitment to reclaiming a life that is no longer overshadowed by the ghost of our past. As winter deepened into a harsh, unyielding chill, the final threads of our shared past began to unravel with an intensity that left no room for forgiveness. I found myself on a solitary journey through a landscape that was as barren and uninviting as the emotions that now consumed me. In the weeks since our last encounter at the park, every day felt like a battle, a struggle to cling to fragments of who I once was, while confronting the irrevocable truth that the love between Elena and me had been reduced to nothing more than bitter memories and unresolved hostility. The final meeting was inevitable. Elena had sent a terse message asking to meet one last time at the old, abandoned pier by the river, a place that once echoed with laughter and promises of an endless future. Now, it stood as a symbol of everything we had lost. The decaying wooden boards and the rusted railings mirrored the decay of our relationship, each splinter and stain a testament to the passage of time and the weight of betrayal. I arrived early, my heart pounding with the mixture of dread and the resolve to face the finality that awaited us. The sky was overcast, a gloomy canvas of heavy gray that seemed to press down upon every thought and emotion. As I waited on the cold, creaking pier, memories flooded back, memories of sunlit days, gentle embraces, and whispered dreams that we had once shared. Each memory now felt like an echo from a different life, one that belonged to someone else. In the distance, I saw her approaching slowly, her silhouette framed by the dim light. Elena's posture was rigid, her steps measured as if she too was bracing for the inevitable confrontation. When she reached the end of the pier, our eyes met, not with the tenderness of old times, but with a raw, unmistakable animosity. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, as we both searched for words that could capture the magnitude of our heartbreak. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and tremulous with pent-up emotion. Elena, I've come here today not in hope of reconciliation, but to face the truth once and for all. I cannot live in a shadow of what we were. I need to understand if there's any remaining honesty between us, or if we are destined to forever be adversaries in the aftermath of this betrayal. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of defiance and sorrow. David, she replied slowly, we've tried to mend what was shattered, but every effort has only deepened the fissures. I cannot pretend that I can return to who I was before, nor can I allow us to live in perpetual pain. Her tone, while quiet, carried the weight of finality, a declaration that the fragile hope of rebuilding had long since been abandoned. A bitter wind swept over the pier, stirring up fallen leaves and debris, much like the chaos that had swept through our lives. I could no longer ignore the truth that had been painfully evident over the past months. We were two people fundamentally altered by betrayal, unable to meet in the middle of a bridge that once united us. Instead of unity, there was only a growing hostility, a silent, bitter resentment that had replaced any semblance of the love we once knew. The conversation turned from tentative reflections to a more direct confrontation of our failures. I recalled the countless times I had looked for signs, the warnings that had been ignored in the hope that love would prevail. I gave everything I had, I said, the anger in my voice mingling with the sorrow of 1,000 unspoken goodbyes. I trusted you with my heart, my dreams, and my future, and now I stand here shattered by the very person I loved. How could you betray that trust so completely? Elena's eyes welled with tears, but her voice remained firm. I never intended to hurt you, David, she insisted, but I was drowning in a life that felt too suffocating. I made choices out of desperation, a misguided attempt to reclaim a sense of self that I felt slipping away. I regret the pain I've caused, but I also cannot undo what has been done. Her words stung like shards of broken glass. In that moment, the conversation evolved into an exchange of accusations and regrets, each of us laying bare the wounds inflicted by our own actions and missteps. The memories of past tenderness were steadily replaced by a harsh, unforgiving reality. Our voices grew louder, sharper, as we recounted the missed opportunities to communicate, the silent dinners, and the cold nights when neither of us reached out to heal the other's pain. Every sentence was a reminder of the love that had once promised endless possibilities, now tarnished by a betrayal that left no room for second chances. We are no longer the people we once were, I admitted, the finality of my tone resonating with the emptiness inside me. Our hearts have hardened in the fire of this endless conflict. I cannot keep living in a state of constant battle, hoping that someday, by some miracle, things might return to the way they were. Elena's response was measured but unmistakably resolute. And I can no longer pretend that I can be the person you need me to be, she said. The person I am now is forever changed by my choices. I've hurt you, and in doing so, I've lost the very part of myself that I once cherished. There is no going back, only a path forward that takes us in separate directions. The finality of her words left an indelible mark on me, a scar that would not easily fade. Standing there on the cold, empty pier, I felt the weight of every broken promise and every shattered dream. I realized that the final fracture in our relationship was not just about the act of betrayal, but about the slow, painful erosion of trust, intimacy, and the unspoken bond that had once defined us. As we prepared to part ways, there was no dramatic farewell, no tearful embraces or desperate pleas for a second chance. Instead, there was a mutual, unspoken acknowledgement that our lives had reached a point of irreversible divergence. With one last, intense look, laden with all the pain and anger that had built up over these tumultuous months, we turned away from each other. Our steps were measured and resolute as we walked in opposite directions, each step echoing in the void that now separated us. The hostile separation was complete, a final, unbridgeable gap had been formed. I walked away from the pier with a mix of grief and relief, knowing that the time for denial had long passed. The memories of what we had once shared would continue to haunt me, but so too would the promise of a future that belonged solely to me, a future where I could rebuild my identity from the ashes of betrayal. In the solitude of that final moment, I felt both the sting of betrayal and the bitter sweetness of liberation. The man I was before Elena's infidelity was gone, replaced by someone hardened by pain yet determined to reclaim his life on his own terms. The hostile farewell was not just an end, it was a declaration that sometimes, love, no matter how deep, cannot conquer the scars left by betrayal. As the dark sky swallowed the last traces of daylight, I embraced the unknown road ahead. The echo of our final confrontation would forever serve as a reminder of the cost of misplaced trust and unspoken resentments. But with every step into the uncertain future, I also carried a sliver of hope, a hope that, through the relentless process of healing, I might one day find a way to forgive not only Elena but also myself. Yet, as I vanished into the night, one truth remained clear: our paths had diverged permanently, and the hostile separation between us was the only fitting end to a love that had crumbled under the weight of betrayal.